Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I'm going to start by talking about Gert Bugard. Bert Bugard was Europeans' first supercentenarian. He lived to 110, and he was born in 1700. And I think his life represents something that we've always known, that there's always been long-lived individuals. In fact, in the 18th century, there were 30 centenarians recorded in Europe, but only 30. And that, I think, is the second thing. We've always had long-lived individuals, but suddenly we are in the era of mass aging. And people often say, how has this happened? How is it, as Tom was suggesting, we've all started to live longer? But in fact, it's actually been a process that has occurred very naturally over the last 150 to 200 years, as we have pushed death further and further back across the life course. It's called the rectangularization of the life course. And to give you an example of that, thank you. If we look at a map of what was happening in 1850 in England, we see deaths across the life course. In fact, half the English population did not make it to 46. Now, half the English population makes it to 80. And indeed, it is tackling the chronic diseases of later life that is what is going to continue to push aging further and further back. I don't know if any of you know what the current official life expectancy in this country is. It's actually 79 for a boy and 82 for a girl. But that is highly unlikely to be the real life expectancy. In fact, demographers are now suggesting that the 2007 European birth cohort has a real life expectancy of 103. And some very serious demographic work is now happening where we are looking at the scientific advances that are now present, not age retardation or longevity research, but the simple inroads we're making to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, etc. And taking these on board, one of my colleagues came up with a projection of the number of centenarians we would have in the UK across the 21st century. And we said, no, you're wrong. Go back and look at your models again. And about a month later, the Office of National Statistics, which is not the country's most sort of out there organisation, they tend to be very conservative, they came up with projections that were even more dramatic than our colleagues' projections. And what they are suggesting is that we currently have about 12,000 centenarians in the UK, that by the middle of this century, we will be approaching 500,000, and by the end of the century, we will be approaching 1 million. And that means that there are 8 million people alive in the UK who are going to make it to 100. Roughly 1.5 million are already over 65. We have roughly 3 million who are under 16, and the other 5 million are aged currently between 15 and 65. And of course, this is going to have huge implications. And when you take into account that there are people, as I say, who are not working on crazy medicine, but they're working on very serious medical advances. For example, I think of the stem cell research that is making tremendous inroads into replacing certain parts of the body. And I don't mean embryonic stem cell research, which is still very controversial, but the kind of stem cell research that's happening at Oxford and in about 300 other centres across the globe, where they are able to take adult cells and actually reprogram them and put them back into the individual's body. And my colleague who runs the Stem Cell Institute at Oxford, he says, I don't work on longevity research, I work on alleviating suffering, but inevitably I'm going to be lengthening lives. And I want to end by raising 3 broad issues that I think we should be considering if we really are going to have such increases in longevity. Number 1, is this going to be healthy life expectancy, or is it going to be disabled life expectancy? And the evidence at the moment is that although we do seem to be extending that period of healthy life expectancy within total life expectancy, we are also increasing the proportion of life when we are disabled. And it is inevitable that the science that is driving healthy life expectancy will also be driving an increased period of frailty. The second thing, I think, is around what we call generational succession. What happens with these long lives when you don't inherit from your parents till you're 80? And I think the final thing is, how are we going to cope with these long, long-lived lives? Are we going to continue to have 7 ages? Or will we have 12 ages? Or will we just have longer 7 ages? Or will we completely rethink the life course? That with these long, long lives, the kind of roles that we are going to live as individuals are going to have to change, and society is going to have to adapt to them. Thank you.
I know what you're thinking. What's this man from the land of iron brew and deep-fried pizzas coming to tell us about healthy aging for? Well, I'm interested in the stages before dementia to do with mental decline. And I'm really fascinated by this. Why is it that when you look at a number of people who started life off with about the same level of thinking skills, why do some people get to old age having preserved their thinking skills better than others? And the raw material to do this, of course, is knowing what people's thinking skills were to start with. And actually, with regard to old age, there's only one place in the world where you can do this. Scotland. Because Scotland tested its entire nation's cognitive skills twice. On the 1st of June 1932, it tested 87,498 children, everybody pretty much born in 1921. On the 4th of June 1947, it tested 70,805 children, everybody born in 1936. So if you can find these people and say, you started a study back in the 1930s and 1940s, we'd like to see you again, you can actually study them, follow up their thinking skills, see who's done well, who's done not so well, and find the reasons for it. And that's what we've been doing in our project. And let me introduce you to some of them. We've got 3 girls from that school. There they are, meeting Her Majesty. They are the Lothian birth cohort of 1921. We have 550 of them. We've seen them at age 79, 83, 87, and we saw them last year on their 90th birthday. They're as close as possible to it. On the right there, we have the Lothian birth cohort of 1936. That is actually one of our subjects there. And that's some of his pals. 1,091 individuals that we're following up. We've seen them at age 70, 73, and my team are halfway through seeing them at age 76. So that's the first thing. I wanted to introduce you to how we're studying. How is it that some people get mental capability stronger than you would expect, given their original? You get the idea. It's the change I'm interested in. So let me just run through some of the factors that we look at. They spend 2 very long half days with us, and I'm just going to introduce some of the factors. It's not unique to us that we do these factors. What's relatively unique is the fact, you can't have relative uniqueness. What's unique to us is the fact that we have these original capability scores. So we look at their social backgrounds in great detail, their deprivation. There's 2 misconceptions about this picture. First of all, what school did they go to? No, it's not. It's Harrow. And the second one is the pictures by Jimmy Syme, not by Harold Brady. So we look at their social background, their education, and their jobs. We look at their engagement. This is a picture by Linda Kozovitz-Fleming, who actually was in the original Coming of Age exhibition. This is 4 members of the Lothian Birth Cohort of 1936. So we look at their engagement socially, physically, and intellectually, and we try and find out what factors from their work. We do their diet in great detail. We try and find out whether their diet is important. And I thought I'd stop every so often and just give you a result that might intrigue you. So, for example, of the long string of things that we looked at in diet, we found that those people in the Lothian birth cohort of 1936 who drank more alcohol had better cognitive function in old age. But you, gentlemen in the second row, you were just a bit too fast in being happy about that, because remember, we've got these IQ data from age 11. When we took that into account, there was no association. The story was not that alcohol was keeping the brains healthy, it was that brighter children were the ones that were having red wine with their dinner later on in life. It was a kind of tribal thing about being middle class rather than actually anything to do with cognitive ability. We also look at physical fitness, healthy body and a healthy mind. squeezing, how strongly are your muscles working, how good are your lungs, how fast can you walk. And it is true, in fact, that once you take people's original ability into account, the people who are physically fitter in old age are thinking more strongly as well. We take blood. We take about 9 small bottles of blood to measure various things in the blood. I'm not going to go through them all, but as Tony Hancock said, that's very nearly an armful. And we measure things like inflammation, that coloured thing up at the top. These are real pictures of people's brain connections, the hundreds of billions of connections. And we can actually not just see them, we can measure on each person to what extent these connections are still working. We've done over 600,000 genetic tests on every person in both cohorts. And we recently were able to find out that genetics contributes only about a quarter of the change in cognitive function between childhood and old age. It's mostly environment. And lastly, our patron was His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. And in the middle is James Goodwin from Help the Aged. And I was trying to remind Prince Philip about what we'd discovered from our study. And James just quickly said, Ian's trying to discover why some people keep their marbles. And Prince Philip said, quick as a flash, he said, why would I want to keep my marbles when I've lost everything else?
So what I want to talk about is what we're learning about the later stages of our journey through life, where actually there are some reasons to be reasonably positive, although we need to recognize that there is some pretty difficult stuff that we have to navigate too. And I want to tell you a little bit about a study that we've been doing in Newcastle, the Newcastle 85+ study, which in a sense complements the story we've just heard from Ian about the Lothian birth cohorts. What we did not have records from when these people were children, but we wanted to get an image of what life was like today for a completely representative population of 85-year-olds. 85-year-olds are the fastest growing sector of the population in the UK, and we know remarkably little about them. So we were able to determine whether or not each individual in the study had or did not have any of 18 different illnesses that are associated with aging. Interestingly, and perhaps sadly, we found that out of the 1,042 people in the study, no one had nothing wrong with them. No one had 0. The lowest count was 1. And most people had 4 or 5 things wrong with them, some 7 or 8 or 9. And extraordinarily, we found that 78% of them, that's nearly 4 out of every 5, rated their health as good, very good, or excellent. And this really flies in the face of the common perception we have that life at advanced old age is basically a sort of bundle of misery, during which you're sitting there counting your illnesses and feeling pretty glum about them. What was more, we assessed who could perform or not perform any of 17 different activities of daily living. These are things like shopping for yourself, cooking for yourself, managing your finances. Things that, if you can do them, allow you to maintain an independent, free living life, and if you can't do them, make you dependent on care provided by others. And we found that at age 85, nearly 30% of men could do it all. They had 0 functional limitation, which was quite an encouraging statistic, and most of them had only 1 or 2. For women, the picture was not quite so rosy, because only 15% of women had 0 functional limitation, and that's consistent with a rather paradoxical feature of the differences in aging between the sexes, that women live longer, as we heard from Sarah, on the average by 3 or 4 or 5 years. And yet they experience more years of ill health and dependency at the ends of their longer lives, something that needs to be better understood. The important message that came from this was that for people aged 85, and we've now followed this group since then, so they're now in their 91st year, there is a remarkable degree of independence, there is a remarkable degree of vitality. A couple of years ago, we held a lunch to which we invited the participants in the study, and there was a room full of 89, 90-year-old people who were absolutely full of bounce. And again, it flies in the face of the generally negative perception that we have of what life is like. But I want to use the last couple of minutes of my time just briefly to talk about what comes after that. Because we need to gear up to the reality of running this course to its finish. And it's not like crossing the finish line of a marathon and picking up your winner's medal. Crossing the finish line in this particular race is the end. We need to prepare for it. We need to manage the transitions that come with aging. We need to recognize that in these changing times, there is a moving boundary of old age. We need to recognize the challenges that come with altering self-image. One of the hardest things for people in today's world, which is profoundly ageist, is to try to maintain spirit and confidence and determination in the final stages of the race when everybody else is dismissing you as a sort of useless, past-it old loser. You're not a loser, you're coming to the end of a very difficult race.
I think the thing that has been, for me, so interesting about the speakers so far, and why you may be wondering, on one level, why I'm here, is that it's revealed just how complex and difficult and extraordinary this process of aging is in how we are actually going to move on and live our lives. And for fashion, which many people see as being something that is inherently ephemeral, rather frivolous, not that important, I would argue in facing something like aging is extremely important and critical into how we're going to improve the quality of our lives and really give us another way of adjusting to the sorts of ravages of illness or cognitive malfunction or drink that we might be being faced with. And so I would hope that in terms of how we are going to learn how to reconceptualize what it is to get older, that fashion is going to play a really important part. I think one of the things, obviously, people say, fashion, but usually if I say what my job is, people get very excited, including lots of men. That's why it is so extraordinary. It has always, and always will, touch our lives. We have always, as human beings, been really concerned about beauty, about adornment, about how we express ourselves, about how we give voice to the person that we are through the clothes that we wear, through the way that we hold ourselves, through the way we, in a way, show respect to other people through the clothes that we wear, and the way that we learn how to style ourselves throughout our lives. And one of the things that has become very sort of frustrating is that in so many ways it's almost as though, and it's been referred to already, that what happens is we are in an inherently ageist society. If you were to go and look at many advertising companies, the majority of people who work there are under 50. There's been a number of research with advertisers about their perceptions of growing old, and they will talk about people as being losers and decrepit, and what would I want to go and sell a product to them for? And yet we are as we get older. And as Sarah has highlighted, the growing power, really, of an ageing population in the sense that there is money there. There are still a passion for beautiful objects and beautiful things that are going to give us pleasure in a life that in some respects may be becoming diminished, but it still nevertheless is important to how we express how we feel about ourselves. And so I think that one of the big challenges is how do we create and project a world? How do we give visual role models, in a way, to the world in which we're moving into as we get older? How can we imagine a different way of being older? How can we give expression to that? How can we fight back? I think I was sort of smiling to myself today because I think many of you will know that the Rolling Stones, it's 50 years, and you think, well, I mean, it's not stopping them from buying designer gear. Yes, okay, they may have the money, but they still got the inclination. And I think that again challenges us to think very carefully about there is no switch where we don't care about clothes, we don't care about what we look like. We do care throughout our lives. We've worked with a number of key people, somebody like Vidal Sassoon, who, although has recently died, that was to do with a long-term illness that he had. Absolutely, until the end of his life, was fighting back in terms of he cared passionately about the way we all look at whatever age that we are. Carmen Della Fice, who is a supermodel, who is still modelling into her 80s, who we've recently done a fashion shoot, is a total inspiration to the power of clothes and to fighting back and expressing, not being embarrassed, not feeling as though somehow you've got to be apologetic for the fact that now you're 80 or you're 85 or whatever it's going to be. So for me, actually, taking the power of a college that we have, where we have thousands of students who are committed and engaged, and of course a lot of them are inherently preoccupied with the fact that they just want the latest gear and it's all about the youth. But you'd be surprised how many of them are also extremely concerned about what it is and how do we find other ways of fighting back against the Botox pressure or the idea of cosmetic surgery, that somehow we have to use fashion and we have to challenge the advertisers, the program makers, the retailers to say, actually, we want to have beautiful clothes at reasonable prices. There is no compromise on that. You can still, with a reasonable budget, still have well-styled, well-made and clothes and accessories. But we have to demand them. As consumers, we have to say that this is what we want. And we want to see in the magazines people who we can imagine. Carmen, she still looks extraordinary. All of us will never look as wonderful as she does. We want to have people like that, but she is not compromising on her age, and that's what we want to see. So for me, fashion is going to be the way that we can help us adjust to the sorts of issues that Tom, Sarah, and Ian have highlighted so powerfully. Thank you.
Francis, I promise there has been no Botox and no surgery. But for me, having had the fantastic experience of being an Olympian is an anagram of Olympian. And my sporting experience is very much one about, at times, that pain, rather too infrequently, at times, victory, but more often than not, purely competition. And for me, that competition isn't about who I stood up against on a field. It was more about the competition with myself, the inner struggle to be as good as you possibly could be, and the choices that one would make in order to perform at the highest possible capacity as often as possible, because that wasn't something that could be achieved on an infinitely regular basis. There were times when it worked well and there were times when it didn't. And my personal training regime and that of any performance athlete could be considered a marathon on any number of different levels. Not a marathon in terms of the 42 kilometres that you have to run, or 26 miles that was one of the founding events of the modern Olympic Games, but actually how often you had to do stuff. So an average week that consisted of 26 hours training. Something like 6 running sessions, 5 weight sessions, 5 pitch sessions, all of which were expected to be performed at maximum physical capacity. There was no such thing really as an actual rest day, because a rest day would consist of stretching, recovery, preparation, ice baths. Yes, I did say ice baths. That is sitting in a bath full of ice. If anybody gives you that choice, don't take it. And therefore, that was a repetition. That's an average week in an average cycle. But that average cycle might be an 8-week aerobic development phase, where the expectation is just to run at 70 to 80% of your physical capacity for hours on end. And the choices we make to develop physically, be it at Olympic level or be it at any level, sometimes are painful. My physical preparation was not completely smooth. 17 breaks of fingers in my career, 9 breaks in one specific moment. That hurt. 2 back operations, several muscle pulls, and standing in goal, letting people hit balls at my head. Proved that physical preparation made absolutely no difference in terms of injury. So the best laid plans still can lead to disappointment, to injury, to breaks, to interruptions in any cycle. So yes, I was lucky enough to get to Olympic Games, but it did have its pitfalls along the way. But it required planning, it required periodization, it required goal setting, all of which are absolutely fundamental to physical progress at any level. Nobody puts on a pair of shoes and goes out for a run without a goal. It doesn't matter what that goal is. It doesn't matter if it's to try and achieve Olympics, if it's to try and weight loss, if it's just to try and keep mobility. And it was a desire to progress that was a painful choice. And lengthening lives, as was mentioned earlier on, is also that choice. And to me, those concepts and the energy that pure exercise delivers, the endorphins, the momentary rush, can make each and every one of us feel better for a period of time. And it doesn't matter if our physical, the moment of our physical activity is simply standing up, is walking upstairs. I myself now made my New Year's resolution was simply to not take the lift, because it just meant there was a bit more exercise in a given day when my physical challenges every day are less and my business challenges are greater. But that in itself is just a simple discipline. But I think that a quote that's particularly attributable at this moment is, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. And physical adaptation is crucial. If you think that just by walking around the block every day will continue to deliver physical results, it won't. The body adapts. What is first seen as a weight loss, as a fitness gain, suddenly will change and it will not have those benefits again. And those physical rewards led to an increase in mental capacity, and it was mentioned earlier on, and I totally agree with Ian, is that for me as a goalkeeper, it was less about running. Goalkeeping is actually purely and simply about a desire to do nothing, because the most successful goalkeeper is the person that actually directs the defenders in front of them to be totally successful and therefore doesn't touch the ball. Hideously boring. Gives you a great opportunity to just shout at people for 70 minutes. So for me, it wasn't so much about how fast I could run or how far I could run, it was about my mental capacity. For me, you stand there as a goalkeeper in 20 kilograms of goalkeeping material. Sounds fine. It's great in England in the winter, or now. However, if you suddenly go out to Malaysia in 90 degrees, 95% humidity, in an environment where in the 4 hours that surround a match, you drink 13 litres of fluid to simply stay hydrated, you cannot have an issue with your physical self because you need to deliver something that has mental capacity. So for me, keeping fit was about the ability for my body and my brain not to have to worry about my heart and lungs. So I could continue to concentrate and to focus. So my physical development had as much to do with delivering my mental capability as anything else. And that exists again at any level. Whilst I'm fortunate enough to sit here as an Olympian, the same principles apply across any age group, any experience level. So whilst Tom talked about the end of the marathon being the end, I think that physical capability and development of it by planning for performance delivers a mental capability that actually then enables you to consider extra time. What happens when the end changes? What happens when you then live longer? What is that coping strategy? And if you are physically and mentally able, through goal setting, planning physically delivers the mental capacity, then when the end game is changed, we go to extra time, we go to penalties, then all of a sudden we don't have the standard English trait of penalties and losing. We possibly take a note out of some of the other nations' books and we can then continue to win because we've made decisions. I've been fortunate enough to see the results of those on a performance field, but they're as applicable to life itself as they are in an Olympic environment. So I would say my message, if you like, is just simply to plan physically because it delivers mental rewards and it doesn't matter what that end game is. All of us can benefit from it. Thank you.